Dobrodošli na nauka.fit podcast. Danas čovjek zbog kojeg postoji ovaj podcast. Znači, ja sam njega gledao već 3 godine i malo prije sam s njim pričao 5 minuta. Znači, ko da ga znam, a on mene nikako ne zna. Steve Hall. Steve, first of all, thanks for being here. And we were just talking off air, and I said to the audience, you're one of the puzzle pieces that started this journey for me, because maybe we're going to come back to this again, but things are happening in my life right now, like, how do I say it? They're just coming. Since I started, I was doing YouTube for 2 years, like trying to do some Omar Isuf style or Casey Neistat videos, but never quite. I always tried to make it educational, but I was always like fooling around and joking around, maybe a little bit too much.
Right.
And yeah, too much. And since I was watching you like for 3 years, and since like episode 30, you had around 1,000 subscribers. How many subscribers you have got now?
We may have hit 30,000 now. I've been watching it creep towards 30,000 because I think 30,000 is when you can have like a membership or something. Not that I'm saying we're going to do that, but I was just like, oh, that's a number to hit.
So can you tell my small but beautiful audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I don't really know where to begin, actually. I guess in terms of like the here and now, I see myself as a content provider, partly through the podcast. I get to interview kind of the brightest minds in the industry, which is just like an absolute gift. And to be able to call some of them kind of friends and mentors now is crazy, because I was kind of looking up to them at the start. I know Eric Helms, for example, was someone who kind of helped me really get into like natural bodybuilding and start learning about that. So that's really cool that I can do that. Obviously kind of produce content over on my Instagram as well, try and kind of put out some info that people hopefully can learn a bit while they're on that platform and enjoying social media as well. And then I am a natural bodybuilder myself. So I have competed. 2014 was my first season. 2017 was my latest. And I wanted to compete last year, but obviously last year was a bit of a write-off for a lot of people. But this year looks like it's good to go. So I'm pretty excited to step on stage again, see if I can bring a better package. Well, I'm guaranteed that almost, as long as I can strip off the fat. I know I've got more muscle this time, so I'm excited for that. And then I'm also a coach. So I spend the majority of my time, I should have started with this, because I spend the majority of my time coaching. That's really where most of my hours every day go into, is coaching people. So I coach mostly aspiring bodybuilders, or a few kind of through their first season, and I have a handful of more experienced ones as well, which I'm really grateful for, and I'm excited to kind of get hold of more experienced bodybuilders as I kind of show myself as a coach and someone who is kind of knows what they're doing and can help that level of caliber of person, because I know I can. It's just whether or not they give me and they have the confidence in me, and it's cool to see that some are now, like some people on my roster now, I'm very excited about their future. And then I also coach kind of coaches within that as well. So the majority of the people I coach are also online coaches or personal trainers. I don't coach them as a business mentor. At least that's not the intention. I coach them for their like fat loss, muscle gain goals and things like this. So that's really me in a nutshell. I have a dog, and I have Ada, exactly. Hopefully she will not bark. She tends to just like lie on the bed and sleep during these podcasts, which is good. And I have a girlfriend, and I live in London. So yeah, at the moment, I also have a home gym in this office at the moment, which is quite fun. So that's me in a nutshell, I guess. And the company's Revive Stronger, which has a whole backstory, which obviously we can get into as well.
Ada is a suburb near my town. I mean, my town isn't urban because it has only like one traffic light. It's like technically a town, but it's like
right.
Not near. But Ada, is it spelled A-D-A or?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the suburbs town here nearby. And I have a dog. His name is Audio, like in the not video, audio. How many clients do you have at the moment?
So I work with 40 people generally is like my upper end. So generally I'm working with 35 to 40 people now. That I don't know if that will change. I have a feeling it won't, because that's basically the most I feel comfortable with. So that allows me, I check in Monday through Thursday. So I have 10 clients every day that I check in with. And then Friday I open up for like programming, things like that. So I can kind of get the mesocycles done, or if I've got like peak weeks that I need to do, that sort of stuff, that can all be done on that Friday. And then I try as best I can, and you probably know what it's like, taking weekends off as best I can. They don't always, yeah, I don't.
Sunday is always off. Sunday is always off for me as well. I wanted to talk to you about your style of podcasting. Like you said, you feel honored to talk to all these people. And it's like, I started saying this, but I interrupt myself. Since I started the podcast, our first episode was with Milo Wolf. And thank you, Mike Israel, for mentioning Milo, because he's really a prodigy. He's really sharp. I like his thinking. Like you said, I'm happy to call him a friend now. I can text him, what do you think of this? He always checks my form when I post on Instagram. Your spine is rounding there. Thank you, Milo. I saw it. Thank you. Anyways, like I said, this podcast opened a lot of doors for me. One of the doors is like my second podcast in my language, which is with... I call him the Mike Israel of the Balkans. And okay. I'm honored because we have a little bit of a Steve Hall, Mike Israel relationship. He's on tomorrow. I'm going to publish the next podcast, and he's going to be on like many years to come, like in your case, hopefully. So I like your style of listening to people. Like, obviously I'm a individual myself. I have my own style, but I try to copy your style, and it's like you know a lot of stuff people are saying. Like I don't want to put any examples here, but you know, like the majority of stuff when people are talking to you. Right. You put yourself like. At least I'm trying to do this. Like my ego, I shovel it down the earth because of the listeners. Because I wanna try to poke some holes and try to ask some questions about the thing for listeners' sake. Is it like the same with you when you listen to people talk about stuff you already know?
Yeah, I'm very rarely surprised by the individual's answer, but they also probably can say it and reference it a lot of the time better than I can, in that I might know it, but I won't kind of be able to explain necessarily the in-depth science behind it or the reference there, because often they are a researcher or they've done the study themselves, whereas I've just read maybe the study once, or I've read their summary of the study, because I'm a practitioner. And if I spent all my time trying to do the research and really into it and trying to think of references, I just wouldn't get anything done with my clients. So the really cool thing is, at least over the last probably 2-3 years, I've really kind of realized that in myself, that my kind of expertise is in practicing and being a coach and getting the best from my clients, not from kind of trying to pull out a study from my ass and kind of put it into my kind of Instagram post or whatever. So yeah, I guess in terms of like my style as a podcaster, I think part of it is just who I am. I am never someone who, it might seem different because we're on this podcast, but I don't tend to talk for a long time. I tend to be fairly concise. I tend to like to sit back and be a bit of the quiet one. I am more introverted and less extroverted. So kind of the hosting role just kind of fell in my lap, because I like to just ask the question, let them go. And it can be difficult sometimes because I think of things I want to say, and kind of the question then like goes out of my head because they continue. And then I have to try and keep the conversation going at times. But that's kind of part of the just experience of podcasting. And like you said, if I didn't already know a lot of what they know or are going to talk about, I wouldn't have those follow-on questions and the ability to kind of follow along and ask an appropriate follow question, because otherwise I'd just be jumping between topics far too quickly, because I'm like, you said a lot, but I don't really understand any of it. I don't really know what you're saying. Let's go to this topic. So yeah, I've never been that person that really likes to really talk a ton and put myself out there a lot. So I really like just listening. So I wouldn't say I particularly try to do that on the podcast, but since people give that feedback, I guess actually I would say I don't even try. I just, that's how my default is. I just like to ask a question, listen, and then when they are done, I will ask another one, because in my opinion, they're giving up an hour of their time. They're the expert, not me. So I want them talking the majority of the time. I want them to feel like they've been able to speak as much as they would like and go into as much detail as they would like to. And I really want them at the end of the podcast to feel like, man, that was really fun, that chat. And I really felt like I gave a lot of value to the audience. So I'm trying to pull as much as I can out of that person, because virtually everyone I interview has books, or they have loads of like blogs, and they have tons of posts. So I'm trying to pull as much as I can out of them in that hour and get as much value to the audience. So if I'm talking too much or butting in with questions, it just probably would pull them the wrong way. So yeah, at least that's how I feel.
You're the Oprah Winfrey of fitness podcasts.
That's excellent.
I had to say it. I was thinking about it. Steve is Oprah Winfrey, because you're such a beautiful listener. And like you said, it's like when you talk, there comes at least 3 questions I want to ask about you, but I have to quiet down, just calm down. And it's always like, oh, I had to say this. Oh no, I said that wrong. Have you had any of these, or all the time?
All the time. Yeah, pretty much. Unless it's the improvement season, I don't feel the pressure there. It's just like a chit chat with Pascal, so it's kind of like, I'm not too worried about that. But very often, especially when I'm introing, when I'm trying to be formal and do those bits and pieces, I'm like, or I can't think of the word. Like I'm like, I had a question, but it's completely gone. Okay, I need to go back to my like notes here. It can be really frustrating when your brain isn't like quick enough to just stay along on target. So yeah, I've definitely said things wrong. I mean, I guess the running joke is that I'm terrible with names, and I quite often will pronounce the person's name wrong. I think I even did it with Pat Davidson just recently. I called him Pad Davidson. I was like, you're not Pad. I don't know where I said Pad.
Speaking of Pascal, du bist der Nächste, Pascal. I hope he's watching, but I want to do a podcast with him too, because he always was so nice enough to answer all my comments on YouTube when I commented on the. He's the guy behind the scenes. You're the front man.
And now Jess is doing all the commenting. He's retired.
Okay.
He was though.
Yeah. How does this listening of yours transfer to your clients when you have sessions with them?
So the way we do our initial consultation is live like this. Mm-hmm. So I just want to get to know them. So I want to hear about kind of what their goals are, what their background is. And it is very much like, it's very similar to the podcast, because some people will just be like an open book and they just go and they just talk, and they give me more than I need, but it's great because I really get to know them as an individual. There will be some people where it's like, to try and open the book is a real effort. So I have to really kind of ask questions and really try and delve into them and make them feel comfortable. And that I think is, again, just me as a person. I think I'm not a threatening person. I think I'm quite like easygoing. People don't feel like I'm like judgy. I don't know. I think people are happy to be themselves around me, and I'd hope they feel that way anyway. So that in the consultation process, like listening is so important, because if they don't feel listened to, they're unlikely to sign up as a client, because they're like, man, this guy just wants to talk about himself, and like he just has his own agenda here. And I'm like, I just want to hear about them so I can get all that information. So that's the initial consultation. But then our weekly check-ins, they're not live. So they basically send in a video recording of their kind of context behind the numbers within their spreadsheet. That's how I kind of say it, is like, give me 5 to 10 minute video, just talking to me about what's happened this week. Don't walk me through the numbers. Tell me like what stressed you this week, what's been pertinent this week, has it gone really well, if you've got any questions, any concerns. So then I have to listen to everything. You can't do anything else but listen. And from that, I make notes, and then I go into their spreadsheet and review things, make any adjustments, and then I record a video back to them. making sure to touch on these points. And sometimes there'll be just silly things they're saying, like, oh, it's snowing here now. And I just make sure to note that down and just have that, because I think part of coaching, it might sound silly to some people. It's like, coaching, that's not part of coaching. They shouldn't, like, that's not going to make the difference to them gaining fat or, losing fat or gaining muscle. But coaching is very much, like you said, a listening type of thing. They want to be heard, and they want to feel like they're connected, and you want them to trust you and build rapport. So when you have those kind of just small things that are just like, yeah, I mean, it has no relevance to your physique, but to joke about the weather at the start is nice, as just a sense of feeling heard, and like it's a friendship almost.
Have you ever had someone where you had to read between the lines, like of something they said, and can you give us an example? For example, if someone had a problem but didn't talk to you directly about it, but you had to read between the lines.
Yeah, I don't know if I can pull an example up, but it's definitely happened many times. This is the benefit of having the video, because people can't like hide. They can try and do an email check-in or something for a few weeks, but I'll be like, I want to see you, because yeah, a lot of people, unfortunately, will try and, they might think they're doing it for the right reason, but I want them to be able to feel they can be upfront, honest with everything. So they might talk through, and they quite often, I can't think of a direct example, but they say something just like, I don't know, oh, I ate a little bit more this day, but I know why that happened and it won't happen again or something. And they just kind of breeze past this. And I'm like, that could be a binge eating episode. What happened here? I want to know a bit more about that, because that's obviously something that isn't directly in line with your goals and what we're trying to achieve. And I don't just want to brush it under the carpet. And it'll be easy for me to do that, because I'd just be like, well, you said you're going to sort it out yourself, and yeah, I'll leave that to you. But ultimately, if they don't manage to sort that out themselves, then they're not going to get the results. I'm not going to get a client who's getting results, and that's not going to kind of look good on the team, on me as a coach, and ultimately that's what they're paying me for. So yeah, sometimes that's something that'll happen a lot, is where people just breeze past points, and I'm like, no, I want to hear more about that. I want to know why that happened. And sometimes there's nothing. Sometimes it is just like, yeah, dude, I just fancied eating like a bit more chocolate because my girlfriend had it there, and it's like, okay, right. But sometimes there is like more of a psychological thing there, or yeah, maybe they need to now like stop the diet because it could lead to worse things happening. So yeah, definitely, particularly if, I don't know if you coach in a similar way, but if I have a check-in that's like a minute long and they just kind of blast through it, I'm like, and they're usually like 5 minutes long, I'm like, something's not right. There's something stressing you, isn't there? And I might just say like, is everything okay? And I'll let them tell me. I won't ever presume anything. So yeah, for sure that does happen.
I have a client, and I had a long video chat with him, and we had like a few live sessions, and it's always like, oh, thank you so much, you helped me so much. And the next week again, oh fuck, I fucked up, I can't do it, and then I'm there to say it's okay, forgive yourself, and it's always like okay, and it's like again and again, Groundhog Day or Groundhog Week. And last time I made a long video to him. I said this, doesn't matter what. And he was like, again, thank you so much. You're the best. Thank you. And I was like, okay, no problem. I will do this every week. I have it's not a problem for me to do this every week, but you have to regulate, for lack of a better term, this with yourself. I'm not here to be a fire extinguisher, and you're on fire every week. You have to turn out the fire by yourself, and that's sometimes the problem with clients and with people in general. Like they have something where they can like overcome like you said, deeper issues for a few days, like get some inspiration from me, and then it comes again, and it's like a little bit sad.
Yeah, but no, that definitely happens. I just had a podcast with Melissa Davis from Renaissance Periodization, and she just released her book, Evidence-Based Evidence-Based Habit Building. I think that's the name of the book. And
I wanted to recommend this book to this client.
Yes, you should. It will be. It's a great read. I mean, the first like few chapters are basically just giving you the science behind habits and everything. So they probably want to just dig into like the practical stuff. But there's tons of practical like worksheets and things to go through within the book, which is really helpful for someone, especially like if they're trying to. A lot of books, they're just kind of, they won't give you the practical resources to take away and actually put into practice, whereas hers does, which is great. And the saying goes, habits can make you, but they can break you. And people get into these bad habits so easily. And like you said, they just keep happening because habits hard to break. Like it can take a lot of time. That's something she says on the podcast and in the book, which is just like, know that it's going to take a long time. Don't give up when you kind of break it once. But if you're binging 3 times a week, if you reduce that down to 2, great. And then you can reduce it down to 1, and it might take a whole year to get to 0, but now you're in a much better place. Whereas if you just didn't binge for 1 week, but then every other week you're binging 3 times a week, at the end of the year, you're just in a kind of messed up place. So that kind of trying to develop really great habits with your clients helps so much. And it just makes life so much easier. Like a lot of kind of muscle building and kind of fat loss and those sort of things, you can almost put it like on the back burner and you can get on with the rest of your life once you have these habits down. Like, I don't know, you get up and you go for a walk. That's already setting yourself up so well for better sleep, for better fat loss, or allowing fat loss to happen more succinctly. So yeah, I completely feel you on that client who doesn't seem to want to take your advice. And you can't, the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And as coaches, we can't force our clients to do anything, but we can teach them as best we can. And and I guess a coach is a troubleshooter at the end of the day, where we're trying to find the solution. And it's like, what is it? And sometimes you aren't the right coach, and you have to accept that sometimes. And that's hard as well, because we want to help everyone. And that's why we got into it, I guess.
But we're not psychotherapists.
No.
That's the problem, because I was saying, like, I'm not schooled for this. I can't find the deeper. I can try it. Maybe I can, but I can't find this subconscious or whatever thing is in our mind. I mean, I know your life. I know what it could be, but you have to make an appointment with someone who is there for you just for this one thing, and then maybe this is one domino that's preventing all the rest from falling in place. Perhaps. Yeah. Have you anything else to say?
I was just going to say, and that's important as well, knowing your scope of practice. Again, a lot of good coaches, or at least they're trying to be good, will try and solve every problem their client has. But if they're kind of, I don't know, injured, maybe they need to go see an actual physio, or if they've got an actual binge eating disorder and like you haven't been improving that over the last months, you should probably refer them out to someone like Jake Lenarden, for example, and his Break Binge Eating Instagram page is like amazing. And as I've got kind of more mature as a coach, I'm much better at those things, where I'm just very honest about, this is in my scope of practice, this isn't. I can't help you to that level. I had a client who was struggling with sleep, and I can do a lot for them, and I have a lot of knowledge within sleep, but not to the level that someone like Greg Potter, who I've brought on the podcast lots of times, he has a PhD in sleep. He can actually help you a lot. So I referred them out to Greg, and they got to the root of the issue, because I just don't have, like, Greg wouldn't be able to help someone to the degree I can for muscle building, because he just doesn't have that specific knowledge and experience in the same way, because I've been doing it for years, and he's very knowledgeable in that area, but he just doesn't quite have that level of experience I do. So yeah, I think that knowing your scope of practice is not only good for you as a coach, it's also got your best client's interest at mind as well. And your client has to accept that. They need to, because yeah, we can't coach them through everything.
Brilliant. I want to talk a little bit more about your podcast. So first thing that I want to mention is I mainly watch American TV shows and movies, and I have got a American accent, but I always say podcast, like because of you're guilty of that. And you mentioned once, like, I know all of your podcasts like by heart when I think about it. you mentioned you have a ritual before your podcasts. Is this the same ritual like always, or have you changed it?
Was I joking?
You were with Mike Israel. It was with Mike Israel, and you said, "Have you, Mike? What do you do to pump up for these podcasts?" Because I watched Mike Israel episodes like 3 or 4 times. Brilliant. Have you got the ritual?
Mike's great, and no, that was me. Like, I don't know, trying to get him to make a joke because he's hilarious. He doesn't need help to make a joke. I don't actually have a ritual before a podcast. I used to get really nervous before every podcast. I'm quite a anxious and nervous and shy person just at heart. That's just the way I am.
That's my next question, Steve. Thank you for stealing the question.
I've ruined it.
You ruined it. Go on.
So. Yeah, I used to get you may have even seen me, but on some episodes I've definitely sweat. So there's been beads of sweat like dripping off my face because I'm that nervous and just hot and probably massing at the same time, which just makes it all more difficult. So I've learned a few things like wearing just like sitting here in my underwear is probably better than sitting in trousers, take my socks off. Those, I'm not even joking. I actually do that.
I'm not joking either because that's one, I don't want to talk about it, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So, but now I get much less nervous, and I think that's just an experience thing. I still get nervous before some podcasts, like if I've not spoken to some people before. I just had Hattie Boydell, Holly Norton, I guess, and Lauren Conlin, can remember all the names. I hadn't talked to those 3 together ever, and they did like a female fat loss roundtable, which was really cool. And I'm really quite nervous at the start, and you probably tell because I fuck up some words and things, and this is where I'm like, fuck, why did I do that? That's so annoying. But by the time I'm in deep into the podcast, like I relax much better. But yeah, I guess probably there's some guests who I'm just always a bit on edge with, and you'll probably find it yourself. Like it's quite tiring, even if you're the host, sitting there having to listen but take it all in and be like, I can't be asleep like doing the podcast.
I mainly just zone off. I haven't listened to a word you said, Steve. Sorry.
Exactly. I don't know how I did it in my last contest prep. I had my shaved head, so I can look back at those interviews when I had my shaved head, and that's when I was in contest prep, and I was like shredded and trying to do these podcasts. And it was actually like, I think for an hour you can do it, like, now, because you're like 7% body fat, so you can kind of do it. But I don't know if maybe the later night ones are more challenging and things like this. But yeah, no rituals, just apart from taking my trousers off, taking my socks off, and then normally try and get like a t-shirt I don't mind sweating in because I'm going to sweat.
Brilliant. But I understand what you're saying, and the first 5 minutes are always like a little bit tense, but then when you go on, it's like easy. But the first few episodes you were like stiff, and now you're more relaxed. Nothing. You like beforehand when you were talking, I had some questions, but now in this answer you answered all my sub questions, so I'm not, a little bit lost now. Sorry. I have no questions. Let's see what the time says. It's like half an hour. It's beautiful. I have a few technical questions. I was always wondering this, like you were doing slow eccentrics, for example, in a stiff-legged deadlift. And I saw a video of myself doing like 100 kilo stiff-legged deadlifts. And I had to check if the recording was fast forward, because it was like I was like, okay, past Ismar, that's not the stiff-legged deadlift. But now I do them like 3, 4 to 5 seconds eccentric, and I'm coming near to failure in like 13 reps with 70 kilos. It's like brilliant. I never went to failure before that with stiff-legged deadlifts, for example. What do you think? The stimulus to fatigue ratio with slower reps, is it better, or is it like? Yeah,
I think this is interesting because I guess I tend to find it works itself out most of the time. So the time under tension is probably the same. So the set length is probably the same, but you might get less reps when you're slower. What I tend to find when people are a bit slower is they tend to actually keep better form. They keep the tension where they intend to keep the tension. And that results in a better quality set, and they get better stimulus for the muscle group, particularly on a hip hinge movement, where people, if you go too quick, and you may have found this yourself, and I'd be interested to hear if you felt like the stimulus was better, maybe you got a little bit more sore in the hamstrings, or they felt more disrupted. But for me, at least, when I go quick, I find I lose tension on the hamstrings. My form starts kind of degrading, and I start just trying to focus more on load rather than the kind of internal stimulus and making sure I'm using the hamstrings. So particularly on hip hinge movements, I'm very careful. I wouldn't say I purposely go slow, but I'm very careful to make sure I'm controlling it, because I know my lower back could easily round and come out of position. My hips could easily drop and fall, and I would barely notice if I was going too quick. Whereas when I go slow, I can keep all of these things in check and make sure that I'm really maintaining that great form. So for me, the benefit of going slower is normally it just improves people's technique. Same on squats, like people like dive bomb all the way down, and I'm like, you're just using gravity there. You're not controlling those repetitions. So yeah, I think I don't necessarily aim for slow eccentrics. I would just call it like making sure I'm controlling the load. And essentially, if you're not controlling it, then the muscles aren't working to their fullest extent, and something like gravity is taking over or something like that. And you're using maybe a stretch reflex, like at the bottom of a squat, and not the muscles in the best way of doing them. So yeah, how did you feel after you did the slower eccentrics? Did it feel harder?
Much harder. It's like hell.
Did the stimulus feel better? Like it was less load?
Less load and better stimulus. And Brett Schoenwell did a meta-analysis, 1 to 4 seconds and 4 to 8 seconds, same hypertrophy. But when you think about it, when you use less weight, it's easier on the joints. So it's a little bit more, less fatigue, but maybe something else, maybe somewhere else it balances out. I think it's better stimulus to fatigue ratio because it's same stimulus, let's say, with less weight. And like I said, joints and maybe some other stuff. Like you said, when you're talking about it, you have better control and you have better tension on the muscle. You don't fuck up the form. And sorry for my French.
Yeah, I also like that's why. And yeah, basically practically I'm like, as long as I can control it, like some movements might be a bit quicker, other movements might be a bit slower, but as long as I'm controlling that, that's the key for me. And for muscle growth, we know how important the eccentric is. Concentric and eccentric and dynamic contractions are kind of the best for hypertrophy. So we want both, but if you don't control the eccentric, like what's happening, it's normally just gravity that's just letting it drop and you're not controlling it. And so that can also like further the risk of injury because you're just rushing the movements. You might just pull something because you're not in control of it. So yeah, I think generally go super slow, because there are issues with, like, I've seen people in the gym where they're just like taking it really slowly down, and I'm like, man, that's like 10 seconds eccentric, like that feels a bit excessive, because they just probably end up fatigued and they won't get as good a stimulus from that. There's probably a bit of a sweet spot there.
And choose one tempo and stick with it for the whole meso. Or
yeah,
okay.
I think the issue is, if you don't do that, you're probably were alluding to, if you don't do that, you could trick yourself into thinking you're progressing. You get an extra rep, but did you do it in twice the speed? Did you suddenly change your technique and form? You want to try and keep that tempo steady. Now, it will probably change a bit as you get near a failure, like your repetition, especially the concentric, is going to slow down, because that's just what happens when you get nearer to failure. You're fatigued, you can't be as explosive. If your first rep looks exactly the same as your last rep in terms of speed of the concentric, someone might argue that you have more reps in you and you could go closer to failure. So I think particularly the eccentric, though, often wants to look super similar, because that's really the bit that, like, that's where you're stretching the muscle. That's where you're kind of getting a lot of muscle damage. And then, yeah, the concentric is inevitably going to slow down to a complete halt at some point for some movements, but probably not in a straight leg deadlift unless you take it to failure. And then it's just like, that's a scary movement to take to failure.
I was looking at the footage of myself doing dumbbell bench press, flat dumbbell bench press, and I went to failure. certainly went to failure because I've tried the -1 RER rep and it didn't go up. And when I was watching it, I was like, on the last rep, like on the 0 RER rep, I was like, you can do 3 more. And it's like so strange sometimes. See myself, and I know that I went to failure, and I was like, at least 2 more, come on. What failure? Where? Why? Does it happen to you sometimes? Because this was so surprising to me.
This is the nuances of failure, because I think a lot of people think it looks the same for every exercise, for every person. And as you know, as someone like you train yourself, it doesn't look the same for every exercise and every person. And I think part of it is related to the exercise. So for example, like on some machines, you can grind reps out. So for example, on like a leg extension, like that's quite easy to try and really grind that last rep out, and you can probably just get it. Whereas if you're trying to do that on like a barbell back squat, you aren't grinding like that, because as soon as you start grinding, you're going back down and you're pinning yourself. It's just not going to happen. Or on pulling movements, so on like a bent over row, for example, you can't grind because you haven't got the stability to be able to do that. As soon as you start trying to grind, you're going to start using momentum and use something else to help get the load up. So I quite often find failure on pulling movements, the rep cadence doesn't look that different from kind of your first repetition to your last, because it can't, unless you're using like a chest supported machine row. Maybe then you can, because you can kind of use your chest, you can really grind and squeeze it back. But on a bent over row, that's not happening. On a lat pull down,
never.
I can't grind down the lat pull down. If I do that, I'm going to start cheating. Something else is going to happen. So for sure, on some movements, especially if it's a bit new to you, it can suddenly shock you. And different people. So I know Charlie Young, for example, or Zhang, I always get his last name wrong. I'm terrible with names. So I think Lyle McDonald's called him out like a few times for not training to failure. And Charlie, though, you've seen his quads, like he is fast twitch dominant guy, and fast twitch muscle fibers will suddenly just switch off. I've certainly trained with people. My best friend from school, he would be a way better bodybuilder than I am, but he hasn't gone down this route. We trained together, and he'd be like you said, doing a bench press, and I'd be like, man, you got 3 reps left, and he'd suddenly come down and he's like, nah, can't do another one. And he'd go up and just drop them, and I'm like, that's so weird. I can grind on bench press, and I've had clients who I've seen them squatting, and they will do some like 4 or 5 slow rep squats, and I'm like, I'm surprised you can do that many. And other people, it's just like they can't do that. So I think it's down to like different muscle groups, different exercises, and also different muscle fiber types that lead to different looks of failure. Because I mean, yes, so it's not as easy as the rep really slows down to a halt. It's like it doesn't always work like that. On an unrelated note, I have struggled with my chest, and I was always thinking, no, I'm not gonna do pre-fatigue. And then this mesocycle, I did my first pre-fatigue. So I did one Mondays like bench press. Sorry, my camera goes off every 20 minutes. Mondays like bench press, cables, and then Tuesdays cables and flat dumbbell. And I'm so tricep dominant. It's not normal. And my arms are big. And I had such a nice, my chest is hurting. When did I train it? Yeah, Tuesday. It hurt like 3 years, 3 days. I did one pre-fatigue, and since then, till the rest of my life, I had DOMs on my chest. Anyways, I wanted to ask you about, I always heard this accident you had and your testosterone was lower. I know all your podcasts by heart, but you never mention it like a little bit extensively. Can you please expand on that? Yeah, for sure. So when I was at university, I used to do, like when I was younger, I'd be doing all these different sports, and I'd like running, and I'd do this like 10-kilometer run every week. Oh, I don't even know, actually. Maybe it was every week. I think I did it quite frequently. I had this route that I'd do around campus, and I'd have my like Garmin, if you know that brand, and I'd have like this watch on and this like heart rate monitor, and I could like track my previous best time, and I was like trying to beat myself. This is just part of my character. I always like to better myself, so like I was just really on that, and I was coming back to my flat like on the last stretch to beat my time, and these lights, the traffic lights were flashing amber. So it was a case of I shouldn't really go because now they're flashing amber, or I need to check that there's no cars coming and then go. But I just legged it, and I got hit by a van, hit me. So that led to short term, I have like some scarring. I had a fractured skull. But after being released from hospital after a few days, I was then put into ER like one evening. I was just like vomiting violently. I can remember just being a bit hysteric, was really not in a good way. It was very, very stressful. And I know my parents took me to the emergency response, the ER. And then I was in hospital for about a month. And what they found was that I had very low sodium levels. And they think I bruised my pituitary gland. And that somehow like knocked on to the hypothalamus and things, but the pituitary gland like controls hormones basically. So whatever it was doing wasn't regulating my fluid to like salt and sodium intake. So if you have too low a sodium in the body, you can go into like a seizure, you can have a shock, and you could die if you weren't careful to kind of moderate that. So I was in hospital for, I think it was like 3 to 4 weeks. I can't actually remember. It was a long time. Like it felt forever. It was awful. I barely felt like I could function. But they let me out, and I was on like diuretics for maybe a year or so to try and keep my sodium in a good range. And I think it was around the time I was starting to recover from the sodium issues that I started to notice. And in this time, I was like doing my bodybuilding, because it was like, in hospital, I lost loads of weight. I came out really skinny. I had been kind of doing some weight training before then, but I lost maybe, I could remember the numbers at the time, but it was like stones of body weight, or like
how much is a stone?
20 pounds or so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why I think back then I used to weigh myself in stones, so I can remember like the stone figures, but then I try and translate them. So I think I lost like 20 to 30 pounds when I was in hospital, because I just wasn't eating and I wasn't moving. So I essentially felt like I'd lost like any gains I'd made. And then I no longer was confident enough to do my like different sports I was doing and do the running. I didn't want to do that anymore. So I was like, I need to build up my confidence, build up this muscle base again, because I'm stupidly skinny. So I like got quite in depth into bodybuilding. And I remember like back then there wasn't as good information as there is now. So I just went down like a full on, like I call it a folk. And that's from Alan Aragon would call it, like if it's a fat bulk, I just like got fat during this bulk. And I gained more weight back than I kind of went into hospital within like the year. I was disappointed if I didn't gain like 6-7 pounds a week. I was trying to gain like a pound a day. It was a lot. And I gained back like all the muscle I'd lost and more. But by the end of this, and this kind of coincided with when I was coming off my the kind of medication for my low sodium levels, when they normalized themselves, I found that I had lumps under my nipples, and I was kind of really concerned to what this was. I didn't know what it was. I thought the worst. I was like, this could be cancer or something. I didn't know. So I went and got those checked out, and they find I had gynecomastia. And then when I think about it, and they obviously asked me these things, they're like, so are you seeing anyone? Have you like been sexual with anyone recently? I was like, no, I haven't. Like I have no libido. I hadn't even like touched myself in like a year or something. Whoa. I just hadn't even thought about that sort of thing. I wasn't growing like much body hair. Like I didn't really have much facial hair either at the time. And I was probably the most depressed I've ever been in my life, and just not good in terms of just mood and energy. And I just thought this was life. Like I just thought that was normal. So that combined with the gynecomastia, they're like, we need to see what your testosterone levels are. And shock, they were like down below normal levels, way below. So they were like, you need to go on to this TRT therapy. So I took something, I think it's called like Testogel. And it was basically this gel that I'd rub onto my chest to get rid of the gynecomastia. So that got rid of that. And also I started growing like chest hair. I started being able to grow a bit of a beard and things. And that took a number of months, and they monitored me. And at that time, I was still training, doing my bodybuilding, and I kind of was getting more educated along those lines. And I was like, I want to do a natural bodybuilding show, because that's kind of where I'd got myself to. And I loved like Matt Ogus, and I found 3DMJ. And then I was like, I'm probably not allowed to do that whilst I'm taking like this Testogel stuff. Like, obviously I'm taking it for health reasons, but it's just certainly given me an advantage, and it's on the banned list. So I requested to come off the Testogel. They weren't sure if I'd be able to sustain normal testosterone levels without it, but I managed to sustain low normal levels. I'm never going to be like the huge, like massively testosterone guy. Probably comes across in my kind of character anyway, that I'm not that kind of guy anyway. But I was so glad that I could like retain normal low levels. I like to say that it was partly down to bodybuilding, building the muscle, eating a healthy diet, all of those factors. But maybe the pituitary gland kind of healed. They kind of think it was bruised. So maybe the bruising kind of calmed down, and that kind of allowed me to have normal levels. So yeah, I that was now coming up to 8 years ago that I came off. So yeah, that it changed my life, because I was in such a hole. Like I said, no libido, terrible energy levels. I had the gynecomastia, which wasn't great. I really wasn't in a good spot in life. And so I always, if anyone is like showing some of those symptoms, I'm like, just get checked out, have a think about it, because like a little bit, like it was, I don't know what's in Testogel, but it's fuck all. So I think like a little bit can go a long way. And it really changed my life for the better. And I'm just glad now that I can sustain off, because yeah, I'd have to, don't know, compete in tested federations or something if I couldn't have.
Now you're like the phoenix who rose up with his guns. I saw your forearms. Do you do forearms? I saw they're like pretty big, or is it like the camera angle? Oh, they're nice. Have you? What's the circum? I don't know the word. Sorry, a circum. How do you say when you measure with the band?
Circumference.
Circumference, yeah. Because I always say the other word, which is like
girth.
No, I say circumcise always.
That's not it.
I know, but I always mix it up. Circumference. Yeah, what's your circumcise, Steve, of your forearms?
I actually don't know how big they are. It's stupid of me, because I hadn't directly trained them ever.
No.
And then I started to, since I saw like Mike and Jared were starting to do it, I was like, oh, I'm going to try this. So I should have measured them before so I could see how they'd grown afterwards. I think I've always had relatively big forearms. It's just my arms are relatively big. So I'm interested to see if they've grown much, because it's hard to see. They're such a small area. So, but yeah, having jack forearms is kind of cool.
Yeah, I trained them for 2 mesos and was cutting. And like this grew 0.5 centimeter and this grew 0.8, and now they're even size, which is nice. My left arm is, my biceps or my upper arm is like 1.7 centimeters smaller than this one, but I don't care.
Oh
yeah. And one more thing about forearms, which is so brilliant. Milo and I talked about forearm training in the podcast. And one exercise, maybe you're gonna try it. I call it the nauka curl. Nauka is science in my language, and in Russian too as well. It's like we were debating if standing forearm curls or bench forearm curls were better. And Milo was saying, yeah, when you do it on a bench, you have a nice stretch, like the real stretch. And I said, but you don't have a peak. And then I just said, why don't you do them on a decline bench? You have a great stretch and a nice peak, and they're really good, because I think that you have a better peak contraction on a decline, since when you're curling on a flat bench, you like, gravity and stuff. I don't want to explain it. So try the nauka curl, and it's a thing now. You heard it here first, nauka curl. I wanted to ask you, what since you met Mike, James, and the RP guys, like you had your bodybuilding. How much time we got? 7 more minutes. I've got three more okay. Things. Let's forget this question, because I have to ask you. A friend of mine I met. Thanks to the podcast, thanks to you, thank you very much, has a question. And he asks, when you lose reps and obviously weight in a deficit, and then you do a deload, you do another meso, you go on for example, mass phase, and you gain the strength back, but you're not quite at your all-time PR. Can you make, so this is your all-time PR, this is you went down here somewhere. You're not at your all-time PR, let's say after one meso. Have you made gains in this range?
That's an interesting question, because I guess there's a few things going on there, because when you're losing that, I always like to look at relative strength and performance. So you might be weaker now, but you're also lighter, which in itself can change like mechanics of lifts. So like bench pressing, if you haven't got as much glute fat, you're probably one of those people now. You haven't got much fat on your bum now. So maybe you're not getting as much of an arch, and maybe there's more range of motion now. So as you're gaining, those things can kind of come into things. And I would say there's also, you could be thinking, okay, now I'm weaker, so maybe I've lost some muscle. And if I'm not back up to my previous strength levels, then possibly I'm just regaining the muscle I'd already lost. And there could be that going on as well. We can't know for sure. So it's a tricky one. There could also be some technique changes as well going on. Maybe you've got better at kind of my muscle connection and getting more out of each rep. That sometimes happens. I know Mike said on the podcast where he's squatting less now than previous, but he gets more out of his quads from every rep because of the way he's doing his technique. So potentially that's happened as well. So yeah, it's tricky to say. Yeah. I guess the practical take home is nothing changes. Like you are where you are, whether or not you did or not, it doesn't change anything. You just have to keep going, and eventually you will get back to your previous strength levels. And I'd imagine you be in a better position, and you will have gained some muscle during that period of time, and new muscle.
By the way, my first interaction with him was like a week ago, and we made a podcast. He's brilliant. And his first thing he said to me, like, I saw you follow Steve Hall. He's brilliant. And I was like, yeah, I got him here on Tuesday. Like bragging. You were the first name he mentioned, and then he mentioned all the other ones.
Oh, awesome.
One more thing, Steve. You're English, you're polite, but here in Bosnia, we swear like on a regular basis. And I have to teach you two swear words, and don't worry, they're not even in the gray zone. Like my mother uses one of them all the time. When we talk about swearing in Bosnian, we go into like religious stuff, and Bosnians are religious and creative about that. So don't worry. This is just a small swear word. Like the first one is, this is u pičku maternu. You have to say it first. Say u pičku maternu.
Oh my God. I'll tell you this. Languages were my worst subject at school. I suck at every language apart from I'm okay at English, I guess. Say it again.
U pičku materinu. U pičku materinu. Please, Steve.
Can I do it bit by bit?
Yeah.
U
pičku
materinu.
Yeah, perfect. Literal translation is like in the pussy of the mother. You can say it like go to hell, like idi u pičku maternu, or you can say u pičku maternu, like hell yeah, man. Like it's yeah. So I don't want to bother you with another one. Say u pičku maternu when you meet a Bosnian. You will make his day. You certainly made this Bosnian's day. And thank you so much for being in my podcast. And I can't wait to see you on the next episode of the Revive Stronger podcast. And I will just say, hvala što ste gledali, budite dobri jedni prema drugima.